my front page is a lovely painting that was done of us working at Maison Aurore. It's a picture that was done of us in the Art Hive in the garden with Helen and other participants on that day. And again, I would like to thank everybody for coming, and I thank everybody who's hosting and helping and putting the slides out and everything like that. I would like to begin by introducing myself and explaining my relationship with Art Hives. So next slide. So I have this picture of us sitting outside in the, it's a no parking day, but in fact, the first time that I met Rachel was on a day where we were knitting red squares for protesting the hike of tuition in 2012. And she tried to explain to me the idea of the Art Hives there, which wasn't very clear to me at the time. But in fact, within the same few months, by November of the same year, I was a member of Co-op Le Milieu, which is the Art Hive in question. And I call this a project twice begun because prior to that, as was mentioned, I had been participating with an art group from 1996 in my community. And we were doing exhibitions once a year. So it wasn't like Art Hives where you have something very often once a week or more, but definitely you have opportunities all the time with Art Hives. It was only the opportunity to join those artists, to join those people once a year for Women's Day. So the fact of finding support, social justice and health and solidarity, all those things were so important to me in my previous community work, and to have something like Art Hives where that is also the case, but more consistently all the time, is so magical to me. Okay, you can change the slide. So I did start a research project in the early 2000s, and then I had a baby, and then and then I returned in 2016 to finish. And because in the interim, I had the wonderful experience of joining Art Hives, I learned about, for example, the theoretical ideas of Oldenberg and Baba, which is written in all of our documentation and stuff like that you might find for Art Hives about third space. And if you want to follow that up, you can look at the YouTube that was done at the Science Shop with Nicole Macready. And because I'm in education and not in art therapy or art education, I chose communities of practice as another base for my study. But as I was working on the research and was thinking about what was my real experience in the Art Hives, I was really brought to this idea of Albert Bandura's theory of human agency. And so I will continue the rest of the presentation just explaining this idea of human agency or agentic theory that he talks about, and just the idea of how creativity works inside the Art Hive and inside the community to really expand sort of the power of ourselves and the power of us inside community. So, okay, we can go to the next slide. So Albert Bandura's theory is based on the idea that people's perception of their efficiency, efficacy, success is influenced by the types of anticipatory scenarios that they construct and reiterate. So the idea that if you do something and you have some success, maybe you're not completely successful, but you have some success, you will keep doing it and it will build upon itself. It's exponential in some way. And his four sort of bases for his idea are intentionality, forethought, self-reactiveness, and self-reflectiveness. And I will continue on. So the next slide is about intentionality. So here is a lovely picture which sort of depicts this idea for me, the idea that we are inspired by our intention. We have this inspiration and it bubbles up. So that's why I chose Anna in the back of St. Henry, Art Hive, playing with bubbles. I did have a generic bubble picture, but when I found this in my pictures, I said, that's exactly what I'm thinking about intentionality. This idea that you can kind of make things just, you know, start to really take chances and make things. And so that was the idea there. And I would say also that if we were sort of following his theory, we could use the analogy of creating art, but it could be creating community, it could be creating anything. So the idea that you could perhaps test out medium and stuff like that. I'm sorry, is it running by itself? Because then it's too fast. Sorry, it's okay, you can leave it on the next slide. We're ready for the next slide. It's good. Okay, so the next slide is about forethought. And again, I did write the paper on the principle that forethought was about forethought in creation of your own individual art practice. But in fact, I chose this picture because it's also the forethought, the planning, the organization about making space for people to practice art, like in the Art Hive. So this is actually a pop-up art hive that we did with my friend Allison there, doing weaving behind Articule Gallery in an alleyway for a particular event. And I do believe that as an individual practitioner artist, that would also be choosing your medium, like choosing the fact of whether you would do collage or whether you would do painting or whether you would choose to take a subject from magazines. So as much as being inspired, you also have to plan and decide what you would like to actually do as a process. And I think that's okay. Also planning for a variety of contingencies in that process. So yeah, next slide, thank you. So I did use a generic one once, sorry. I don't know, the self-reactiveness, I couldn't figure out what was it, like a really good image for that. I like the spattered paint. I like the idea of just the fact that just the same as creating space, just the same as creating art, we are always responding. So very often when we've done the forethought, and now we are beyond the planning, we are working, we are doing art, right? And as we are doing art, there are a lot of situations where we would adjust, we would change, we would find that the material isn't working how we want or something like that, and we would change how we approach it. And I think that that is a really good venue for things like agency, because I believe that the more that you experiment, the more that you are able to kind of test your own boundaries, and given a space to test you know, your own boundaries. You know, there just aren't so many spaces in the world where you don't fit into your role, right? And this is a space where you can check other roles, you can experiment with other roles and stuff. And the last slide, so it's okay, you can play the last slide. So the last slide is on self-reflectiveness. So this is once you're really into the meat of doing a production, of producing work or producing a space or making space for people to work or anything like that. So there are ongoing feedback loops that, you know, at least for me, they play in my head, but however it goes. So there are ongoing feedback loops individually. Also within the community, I believe that the way that art hives are, with the possibility of people mentioning things that they have more expertise in than you do. If you start in a medium and you discover that your neighbor says, oh, you know, I've worked with that before and this is how I did it, it really helps. It helps people to go farther, and to have some confidence in what they're creating and all of those kind of ideas. So yes, I think that that pretty much covers all the things that I have to talk about. When I did it alone, it seemed really long, but this seems really short. But that's the general idea. And just to kind of wrap it up with the idea of agency or agentic theory. So the agency as part of community is in another part of my paper, I talked about the idea that everybody at the Art Hive is a chapter in a textbook. So if everybody's at the Art Hive talking together, then you have, you know, a chapter on whatever expertise that person has. So I do like that analogy very much, the idea that we're all sort of a chapter in the textbook, and it helps very much with the idea of each one teach one and other things that come up in the archives. So thank you for your time.